Hey everybody, welcome to today's program. As always, I'm Sally. We have Peg with us today for a class on miniature gardens, which is a fun topic we cover not all that often. So this is a fun one, in dwarf plant varieties. I'm just gonna take a few minutes while everybody's getting logged in to go over some notes for those of you in particular who are new to our programs. For those of you who attend frequently, welcome back. As always, we are glad to have you as spring is really getting into full swing. For those of you who are new, this is a Zoom webinar. It's not a Zoom meeting, so we can't actually see you or hear you during this class. The way that you'll ask questions is to open up your Zoom menu bar, hit the Q&A button, and you type your question into the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring that, and then as Peg is able to take questions, I'll give those questions to her. If we're not able to get to your question today, then you can always follow up with us by hitting reply on your Zoom confirmation email. That goes directly to me, and I'll pass it on to Peg, or if you need to talk to someone else on our team, I'll pass it on to them. We'll make sure it gets to the correct place for you. Finally, we are recording today, and tomorrow we will follow up with a copy of the recording as well as a coupon. So you can keep an eye out for those materials tomorrow. I think that is about it. Peg, for most of you, I know needs no introduction. She is one of our plant and design specialists at our Fair Oaks location. She spends a lot of time doing classes for us, which we really appreciate. She was a member of our Gardening Advisor television show team back when we used to offer that. And so, Peg, as always, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And I hope you're going to enjoy this particular show, because I, of course, as you know, very fond of container gardens of all types. A lot of people don't have a lot of space, and so containers are the answer for that, whether it's a condo balcony or a small townhouse back garden, or if it's even a large garden, then you can be like me, have a few too many of them on the deck, on the patio, by the front porch, out in the garden. Totally enjoyable. One real beauty about them is they're also very mobile. And I enjoy that because I do like to change them out. Today, we're actually focusing on some very interesting and unusual gardens. The little guy that I have in my hand is a very tiny little hypertufa container that I made a number of years ago, and it was sitting among the plants near my driveway that you will be seeing this morning. And as I passed by it this morning, I saw that it had the little sedum rooted in it. And then I went into the greenhouse, where there is a wonderful collection of fairy garden stuff, and tucked the little house inside. Now, one of the beauties of this hypertufa, and I'll explain to you what hypertufa is in just a moment, but one of the beauties of this is it's a very porous material, and it absorbs and holds water somewhat, but there's good drainage. And now this one has been there so long, I'm talking several years. It has all sorts of moss growing on it. If I could zoom on this thing, you'd be able to see all these little mosses. So this is an introduction to gardens that are made in hypertufa containers and similar, whether it's ceramic, but we'll talk about each of those as we go along. And it's not going to be about how do you make hypertufa. That's a program in and of itself. And in talking with Sally, if there's enough interest in that, we may indeed do a how-to a little later in the season. So this is a program about miniature gardens. And let's bring up the first picture, Danny. I think of miniature gardens as entering the world of fantasy. And many years ago, because I had so many wonderful little grandchildren, I really got very heavily into this. Now, those grandchildren are all grown up primarily. Maybe one's a little younger. 15 is the youngest of the grandchildren. And during that period of time, I didn't do quite as much with the fairy gardens, but I will be going back into that a lot because now I have the two little great-granddaughters. And so in the next picture, in this world of fantasy, this was created actually earlier on for my grandchildren. And these little houses, Leo makes them. Here at I will be talking about the Fair Oaks location, and all three of our locations are fantastic. But we have this incredible interest in the Hypertufa containers, and Leo makes with some help from Raul. But Leo is primarily the guy who designs and creates these containers, as well as planting up other beautiful containers. And so he has had the time, fortunately, in January to do a time-consuming thing with creating some of these containers, and we do have them here at the Fair Oaks location. Now, the fun thing in this little fairy garden setup here, and we do have some of the houses that he's created, but the fun thing is that the area was just too small to plant real plants in some of this. And so I gave the little grandchildren little artificial flowers to tuck into their flower pots. Okay, we'll do the next one. Now, another grandchild growing up created her own little fairy garden in a really large pot. Now, we don't have this particular pot available right now. It could be special ordered. I believe I talked to James downstairs, and he seems to feel it could be special ordered. I didn't check the other two locations as to whether they had it or not, but it's a crescent pot, and it's staged on a dead tree stump. Okay, it is using the little dwarf or small evergreens and the little house and some mosses, the Irish moss and the Scotch moss, thymes and sedums, and some of the little fun things that create this fairy. Now I see in the background. Excuse me, I'm like everybody else. I have a few of the allergies. I see in the background, and I'm going to show you this, not because we have it for sale, but just what this Hypertufa can do, because I see in the background there's a couple of these leaning against a stump. Many years ago, we made leaves with the Hypertufa, and I actually painted this with acrylic paint. And it has been in my garden as a little water garden for the birds for a number of years. I'm amazed that that still retains a lot of interesting color. So, as I said, that's just for fun, and to say, you know, at some point in the game, if you want to learn how to do Hypertufa, that's fine. And as Danny asked me earlier, what is Hypertufa? This container is not Hypertufa. The Hypertufa are the ones that we make, and it's primarily a mixture of Portland cement, sand. We use Pro Mix, which is a potting mix that has perlite in it, and then a little what do you call a mesh, a fiber mesh to hold it all tightly together so that it doesn't crack. Okay, so that's basically what it is, but we're not going to go into the how-to today. Let's continue with some of these and what's planted in them. This again was an earlier, very large hypertufa that we made almost in place because it was so large. And it was a part of the entrance into the area where I created this fairy garden fantasy world for grandchildren. And again, it has a fun little house in it, a ground cover, Irish moss, Scotch moss, various creeping thymes. I see the little pink flower there is an armeria, and I think I brought a nice big one up. I'm going to mention these plants because they're so interesting. This one is perennial, and it's an armeria. It blooms over a long period of time. It stays very low. I cannot believe that I did not bring my Joyce Jen scissors up here today, Jenny, because they're fantastic for deadheading when you need to. And you do need to, because it looks better, but it also keeps it into a continuous bloom when you deadhead the spent flowers. But this is armeria, and you'll see it in other containers that I have done. And then this is a little tinier ground cover one. They're sold under steppables, but you know what? I don't want to go walking around on this one, okay? It's a little alpine geranium, and I think it's difficult to see, but it's a tiny little flower. And once it's established, it's covered in those little tiny flowers, heavily in the spring and periodically in through the summer. So that's a really interesting one also. And the next one, let's bring that one up. All right, a part of another established one that I have underneath a Hanoki cypress that I have trimmed up, and it's growing taller. There is a very small, it'd be on my right, okay, very small little round mounding dwarf Hanoki cypress. And the grassy look that you're seeing there is a carex. So this is at the edge of a large cascading Japanese maple. And you're getting a lot of change of color and texture there. The plant that you're seeing, the yellow lutea, at the bottom of this is actually in the ground around this container. But I love these containers nestled into the edges of beds, or where it does have a background that can pick up things. Now, in the next picture, which is not mine, this happens to be a picture that I took on a garden tour several years ago, because this lady had grouped these hypertufa containers on her patio. And they had various and sundry things. She was on a garden tour that day, and I suspect that these didn't get a whole lot of attention. They're kind of fun, but not too exciting, are they? What do you think, Danny?
Very brutalist.
Okay. But there's one reason I put it in here. It's very important to keep these raised off the ground somewhat, either on some type of pedestal or stone. And actually I used some brick to keep it up off the ground so that the drainage hose don't get stopped up. Okay, important. All right, this is the major focus of the show today, is a redo that I did. This is at the edge and actually trying to creep out into my driveway. I have a large circular driveway. It is permeable. I've lived in my home for 64 years. Not many people stay in one place that long. It has always been permeable, so I can say I'm ahead of the curve, right? And one of my daughters-in-law says that more things grow in my gravel driveway than in her beds, okay? Now, All that being said, if you're doing permeable, please don't do it with pea gravel because you sink down into that. This is actually that red Seminole stone, and it has just been fantastic. All right, this is all at the edge of that, and this is to give you an overview of how I've staged these containers because I enjoy these small plants. I have a large place. They're backed by large plants, and I like that they're backed by large plants. So in the next one, you're getting a little different view of that because there is a border behind it, and there's the smaller versions of the crepe myrtle. There's dogwood. In the far distance, you can see a viburnum in bloom. But in these containers, I grow a number of small shrubs, and as you can see, there is a Japanese maple in there. I like to choose the dwarfer forms of Japanese maple or the cascading forms. I have a huge one in a very large pot in the backyard that has been in that pot now for several years, and it's fine. I will often go around the edges, removing some of the soil, loosening some of the roots, and put in a little fresh soil and give it a good dose according to the directions of planktone to fertilize it and give it a go. I don't want to fertilize heavily in these because I don't want them to grow heavily, but they do need some food. And so I really reach for planktone. Now I'll show you closer versions of what I have done in these. This is an anchor for it, and I have had this container for a very long time, and in it is a Dwarf Pieris japonica. Now, if it's large enough container, you can even go like with a 1 gallon. When you're choosing a shrub, if you want one that already has an established look, it's very easy to take that shrub out of its container that you buy it in, gently loosen the roots, shake out as much soil as possible, and plant it into this container in the mix that I'm going to recommend to you today. But here I have various forms of hosta because I love the dwarf hosta, and I have quite a collection of them. And you can see the variegated vinca minor that's trailing out of that. Now, it trailed out so much that it's also forming a ground cover underneath these containers. And it's really pretty interesting. It's mixing, which it doesn't show in this picture. It's mixing with a ground cover there mercy, I've forgotten what it's called. Losomachia, okay. The little Losomachia aurea is mixing with this. So you've got a total ground cover underneath these containers. And then the next one, right next to this large container, is another large container. In the foreground, you can't see the container, but there is a dwarf forsythia in there. Now, we do not carry that particular dwarf forsythia anymore. It's very old, but you can use many, many different types of shrubs in these containers. You have a lot going on here with contrasts of color and texture and form, which I enjoy in any garden, regardless of how big or how small. So you've got in this miniature garden area, the small canopy of the Japanese maple. Down beneath that, you have another container that has a beautiful carex in it, the golden carex that weeps over the edges. And then there's also another little dwarf Hinoki cypress with that mix of hosta. And in the foreground, is a Hypertufa ball. And that one was made on a large styrofoam ball. Okay, we're still in the Hypertufa business here. All right, closer up underneath. This is what's going on underneath that Japanese maple. And next to it, because I don't want this to be just a Hypertufa thing, it isn't. There's a plastic container there that's very substantial, that's been there for years. And it also has a lot of the collection of the Dwarf miniature hosta that I have. You can see very clearly the ground cover that's there with that vinca. And in this area, it's the green vinca minor, but it's actually quite attractive. It would be pretty. It would be sitting on just the red Seminole chips, but I like the fact, and I only edit this to keep not let it take over. And the next picture is a little bit closer view of how those all play together. And let's continue, Jane. Oh, I do have a container with the forsythia in it, but this could be cotoneaster. It could be any number of small, as I said, the Pieris japonica, which we don't have, I think, in the little tiny containers. But if you want instant gratification, there's some small pines that would be beautiful in this. As I said, if the container is big enough, you can always rinse away, clear off some of those roots and plant it into the container. But here again, I've used a little fairy house and a piece of wood. I'm very fond of driftwood, okay? And in the following one, again, this is a plastic type container. It's a low bowl. All of these containers, by the way, have excellent drainage because these plants require excellent drainage. This one is a collection of different sedum and hens and chicks. Lots of color and textural differences there. And this year, we're getting some incredibly beautiful hens and chicks with more to come. There's some wonderful colors out there now that we've just not had before. But you can see from this picture, as it moves on down that planted area, that there are other containers coming up. And so let's take another closer view of those hens and chicks. I have one that will cascade out over the container. And oftentimes they'll flow down and even take root in the soil beneath because it is stone and they love that area to grow in. But and I think towards the back that I maybe even have a couple of creeping thyme that will creep over the edges of that too and soften it. And here is one that's really established from a couple of years growing in. So it can show you what they're really like once they have the opportunity to grow in. Now, here is a freshly done one. This is a large Hypertufa container that Leo created in January. This is a container that's large enough and deep enough to be able to use a larger shrub in. As I said, where you take it out of its original container, loosen those roots up, shakes the soil, or all the soil out, and then place it inside, okay? So let's go into the next one because this is showing you the overview of the plants that it's staged with. Presentation is everything. A lot of times anyway. And how you present things is very important as to how you perceive them. Behind this, in the border that is behind this, there's some color pickup. You see the Irish moss and the Scotch moss has the contrast behind it with the carex that's growing there. And the variegated abelia that is beyond that. And then on a little further is the evergreen mahonia. And so you see, you have a backup, a pickup of color there in this area. How much sun does this get? It gets actually quite a bit of sun. Not total sun all day, but ample sun to grow anything that enjoys sun. At least 6 to 7 hours of direct sun each day, okay? Continuing on with that is another ceramic. Would you do me a favor and turn my phone off so that it doesn't go off while I'm talking? Okay, this is a ceramic container. And we have a lot of beautiful ceramic containers out there. I have chosen a lot of the low growing ones because these miniatures seem to enjoy that kind of thing. They don't have as deep roots as a lot of things do. And yet, in this one, I would say it's at least 10 to 12 inches deep. And I do have a dwarf hinoki cypress growing in here. While I was doing a complete repotting of the smaller containers, I did not do a complete repotting with the big ones. I did loosen to the edges, added a little good potting soil to it, put in my Plantone fertilizer, watered them in. But in a lot of the other containers, I totally removed everything, shook off the existing soil, and totally repotted them along with, again, some fertilizer. So this one was done that way. And then I put back the existing little dwarf hinoki cypress, and I did my pruning as I went along. I love to open up the Japanese maple somewhat by removing a few of those strategic stems and any dead stems from overwinter. I did the same thing with that flowing forsythia. And in another area, I do have a cotoneaster that does the same thing. And so I pruned that so that it was an interesting form, but also could grow these plants beneath it. And this is, of course, the different varieties of creeping thymes in here primarily, okay? Now, I also have in the next picture, I have a lot of blue ceramic containers. And this one is planted up with a colorful bronze ajuga and mondo grass and a lovely pine, oriental pine. So I have used a lot of shrubs in these containers. In the background, you can see another small shrub that I really pruned heavily because it did have some winter damage on it. Now, all of these plants have gone through the winter for several years and not been harmed. I'm talking about the shrubs primarily. Every now and then, I will lose a few of the little perennial things, but it's very easy to replace those. You can just dig out a space and replant it. Okay. I'm going to go through these and then we're going to talk about a little how-to. Okay. This is a little vignette as a part of a larger one, and you're seeing the armeria there. You're seeing the little green dwarf hinoki cypress and some of the little fairy garden things. And I did weave myself a little arbor of stems to make a little interest there in the fairy garden. And in the next one, this is actually going back to the driveway and a lower hypertufa container that has a dwarf holly and a little dwarf cypress, other dwarf forms of the sedums and the walkables. If we come back to me, I'll present just a few of these. One is Blue Star Creeper. This is a lovely little ground cover plant, and it has a lot of bloom in the spring. and off and on into the summer. Now, this one has dropped into the grass area where I'm growing it at my home, but it's not invasive. I don't consider it to be invasive. I think it's beautiful and in addition to that area there, you know. When I spoke of the little dwarf hollies, they're so sweet and they are very slow growing. But if and when, although this one would take a very long time to do that, when they reach the point where you no longer want them in that smaller container, you can plant them either into a larger container or into the garden. And I mentioned the dwarf Hinoki cypress. There are a lot of different varieties of Hinoki cypress. Some are quite large. I'm talking 10, 12 more feet. But there are also stages of sizes under that. And this little guy is a dwarf form and will stay in those containers for a very long time. This one is a golden one, but there's also the green ones. When I spoke of the dwarf hosta, I brought these up to show you because I think they're really sweet. And these are actually very nice if you have a large hosta at the edges of a large hosta. This one's called a mini skirt. What is this one called? Pandora's box. I sat that one too close to something and it turned sideways. Isn't that sweet? They're wonderful. And then when I spoke of dwarf grasses, this is wonderful little grass. This is the Acorus, but it's the dwarf form. We use a lot of Acorus in our larger containers, but this is the dwarf form. But look how fun. I'm going to bring up this variegated creeping thyme. Look at the contrast here. It's all so pretty together. Forms, color pickup, that sort of thing. Okay, so those are really, really sweet. And then I also went into the greenhouse and they've got the cutest, they're not little fairies. Well, maybe they've got wings, they're little fairies. Look how sweet that little one is laying there on that Irish moss. Really sweet. I love the fantasy of it all. It's just great. And when I spoke of color in the new ones, really, in the hens and chicks, I hope you can see this color really well. And I was fascinated because several years ago, well, three years ago, maybe, one of our suppliers sent me this particular one. Guess what? Its name is Peggy. How about that? I don't think it refers to it, but anyway, it was fun. But look at the color in that, you know. Now, what are the needs of that? This needs less water than the Scotch moss. So it's not really too good an idea to plant the Scotch moss as a ground cover beneath the succulents of this type because they need less water than the Scotch moss does. Always, when you're combining plants, think about the needs of those plants. Okay. Here we go. Thank you. Oh, I should show you this one. Look at the webbing on that. That is really, really fun. Neat webbing. Let's see what other pictures. Let's go quickly through a couple of these and let's hold Clara till last. Okay. All right. Just again, another one, Hypertufa with the Pieris japonica. And goodbye to that garden. We're going to talk about how to formulate some of that stuff. Okay. And we're going to hold on to Clara for a few minutes. All right. What is the potting soil that I do for this? Whether it is in a wonderful ceramic bowl or in hyper 2.5 or in plastic. This is a sweet little bowl. It would be wonderful to do the hens and chicks and the succulents in this one. Always, and we do cut reasonable size. It's like a yard, I guess, of this landscape fabric, particularly to make it easy for those of you who are shopping to do your own containers, because this is what I always use in the bottom to cover the drainage holes. This keeps the soil in where it belongs and kind of keeps the critters out also. So we always put a piece of landscape fabric over the holes in the bottom and then the soil inside. But the mix that I use in these miniature gardens is different than the mix that I use in regular container gardening, okay? I don't use our Merrifield mix in these containers because it contains a polymer which helps with the watering. It grabs water and actually kind of releases it, so it helps with that, but I don't want that to grab. I want these to have impeccable drainage, okay? And so I usually reach for, you can do the Espoma, the organic potting mix if you choose. You can do the Fox Farm. Oh, I think I can do this. You can do the Fox. I'm really fond of this. Our mix, but I'm fond of Fox Farm's mix too. It is an excellent mix, okay? So I will do half. I'll do a mix here. I'll do half potting soil. And then we have a product called Vole Block. Vole Block. It's a small permeable stone that holds water to a degree, but also aerates and is good to let drainage for these particular plants. And then there is sand, okay? This is not play sand. This is builder sand. It's much coarser, okay? So I will do a blend of the potting soil, 50%, 25% of the Vole Block, and 25% of the sand in these containers, mixing it very thoroughly. And then I will use the fertilizer that you actually have over there that I didn't put on the table. Pantone is the one that I use most often. Garden tone you could use too, but primarily it's Pantone. Follow the directions that are on the package here and mix that thoroughly. It is a slow release kind of thing, okay? And it's excellent for this. Then probably midsummer, I will go in and work a little more into the soil. I prefer this over the Bloom Booster, for instance. That's a little too much for it, although one could use that half strength if you chose to do that. Yeah, this could be used half strength. This is what I use primarily. In addition to when I'm planting, I use the Pantone. It's all organic, by the way. This is not organic, but it can be used in containers. And it's great actually on your regular containers. Okay, thank you, Danny. All right, I think that kind of explains that when I do plant these up, I take them out of their pots, loosen the roots slightly, and tuck them in. This one would go over the edge of that. This one would come over this way. But look at the contrast on that. It's very interesting, isn't it? And in the low pot, it's particularly interesting with these plants, okay? I had a ceramic one also. Love the ceramics. And actually, when you're talking about winter, going through the winter, I obviously do not empty all of my pots. Plus, a lot of the pots are supposed to go through winter. All of the pots that we discussed today are planted for winter interest also. So they don't get empty. Neither do they get watered in the winter time for me. So they're on their own. And they come through beautifully, okay? I will lose a small plant occasionally and have to replace that, but that's not a terribly big problem, okay? But these containers, as long as they are not sitting on the soil, have gone through pretty well for me. I'll lose a terracotta container every now and then, but so far I haven't lost any ceramics, but I never allow them to sit on bare soil. These are elevated on brick for drainage purposes, but also I don't want them sitting on the soil. In the back, they're on slate, they're on my deck, and they're where it's contacting wood. I do not want them to sit on my wood because it rots it. And so they're always elevated there. And if they've been going through the winter time for me, I better knock on some wood. Nothing's guaranteed. But I haven't lost a ceramic one in all these years. I will lose a terracotta one every now and then. So I want to do a tiny bit of a commercial, infomercial. Is that what we call it? Right. Because I was out today and we've had so many trucks coming in, and I'm very excited about the birds, bees, and butterflies, and how we need to reintroduce the habitat for all of nature, for that matter. Some I'd like excluded from my garden, that's for sure. I could do with a few less deer. But as I was going through some of these things in the perennial section and the annual section, next week I will be doing a program on birds, attracting the birds, bees, and butterflies. But I want to tell you ahead of time that these things are just coming in. There are some of the most exciting salvia in the annual section. This one is a rocking series, R-O-C-K-I-N. It's rocking deep purple. This one is a perennial. It's also a salvia, Salvia greggii, and it comes in red and different coral tones. So there's some beautiful colors in that. Now, we're not talking about stuff for miniature gardens here, okay? This is an infomercial for birds, bees, and butterflies. Now, here is something that I'm really excited about, and that is a lot of the really new varieties that are out there. I have any number in my garden already, and particularly in the bird, bee, and butterfly garden, of the Nepeta. Wonderful, wonderful older varieties, but there's some new varieties out there now that I'm anxious to see what they're going to do. This particular one is Cat's Pajamas, and it's supposed to bloom for the entire season, although some deadheading is required on this to keep it going. But we are talking about plants here that are very attractive to hummingbirds. And the hummingbirds are beginning to come now. And I love to have the plants where I can see them. But I also had to pick up because usually this is divergent. I realize that, but I couldn't resist. We're getting in so many new annuals too. Along with these taller things, whether they're in the ground or in a container, I thought this was a good mix. This is a very underused plant. It's often referred to as a potato vine, but it's not a potato vine. It's Solanum jasminoides, and it vines just beautifully. But I thought that that was a nice pop of color, along with a couple of the really new Calabricoa. But isn't that pretty? In the ground or in a container. So that just, it's so exciting to see when all these plants come rolling in, some of the new varieties. Of course, I love all the old dependable ones, okay? But it's fun to see what have they come up with next. So that's all good. All right. One thing, okay, while I'm at it, you always want to know what I enjoy most. We just got these in, thank goodness. We hadn't had them for a little while. I absolutely love this when I'm doing all my potting up because it scoops in and it's very good. And speaking of scooping in, I would have to say first that gardening is a lot of work, but a lot of fun. And it's so good for our bodies and our minds. I don't like to pull a whole lot of weeds, and heaven knows I've got my share, because it's sort of a mindless task. And sometimes it's good to have that time, you know, to go out and just think about nothing, do nothing except nature, and that's all good. There's certainly a little frustration also with gardening. And actually, it could even be from Clara. She's a little frustrated here because she has turned into quite a gardener. Clara's 3.5, but she was having a little difficulty getting that glove on. Okay, let's come back for a second to meeting. So it's really too bad that Foxgloves doesn't make a glove for children. I need to call the lady. There's a lovely lady that really started this Foxglove thing because she wanted to be able to feel everything that she was working with. And a lot of the gloves don't allow you to do that. So I have worn Foxgloves for years, and they're very washable. They last for a long time. And you've heard me talk about them before. So I wish that I could give Clara a pair of Foxgloves that fit her little hand. And all that being said, Clara is also using, because she is learning how to do containers, and she's doing a great job of it. Her Aunt Bridget lined up the containers, told her how to put the fabric in the bottom and how to put the soil in, and then Clara helped pot them up. But you can see even she is using the little scoop, and she has a wonderful time working in the garden. So I'm encouraging, I can encourage my children, my grandchildren, now my great-grandchildren, and a lot of times I've encouraged the neighbor's children. Okay, Sally, I think that we should take some questions.
Great. Oh, I love seeing pictures of Clara. All righty. First question for you, Peg, is one I'm sure a lot of people have. What do you do about deer and rabbits?
Okay, would you look, I think I didn't sit this over on the table. I have them. I have, amusing, really, not amusing. I had 6 doe come through the yard, and they were beginning to munch. So I thought, oh dear, it's time, it's springtime, things are growing rapidly, and so you have to spray a little more often. My yard is not fenced. It will never be. It's too big for that. I do have an area that is fenced with deer fencing, in which I grow my vegetables, because I cannot spray those. If the deer doesn't want to eat it, neither do I, okay? But I have consistently used a product called Bobex. It is all natural. You don't want to eat anything you put it on, but the deer don't like it. Rain doesn't wash it off. However, in the spring with those things that they particularly like my daylilies and my hosta and a number of other things, particularly my oriental lilies, you need to spray every couple of weeks in the spring. And then it's every month, okay, in the summertime is fine. So I went out earlier in the week because you have to wait for a day that the sun is shining, obviously. And I sprayed almost everything, whether it was something they liked or didn't. And the next day, sitting on my front porch, I chuckled because these same 6 doe were passing through the garden and they were sniffing and never ate a thing. And they passed through their pathway across the street and away. They didn't find anything to eat. So that's good. And I really think if I'm very careful to keep after this, and I will be because I love my hosta, they'll eventually decide, I don't like this garden, I'm going somewhere else, okay? This somewhat repels other animals too, squirrels to some degree, and rabbits, okay? Fortunately, I personally don't have rabbits because I have fox, and I love the fox. The fox, yes, I know fox can get rabies, as can raccoons, and I have no love affair with raccoons, okay? Because they're not afraid of you. The fox won't bother you. And right now they have their little kits, so maybe you're even having the opportunity to see those kits playing around with us as they're growing. But they get the voles, they get the mice, and they get all those little critters, and the fox are wonderful. So they also get the little bunnies, okay? So that's what I do. I spray with the Bob-X. Now, a lot of people use liquid fence. I've stuck straight with this because if I used the liquid fence, I wouldn't be sure what was working, okay? As long as it worked, it didn't matter to me, okay? So that's my answer.
All right. Okay, next question is about some of the succulents, the hens and chicks specifically. Do those last through winter? Are they winter hardy?
Yes, they are winter hardy. Yes, particularly if they have excellent drainage. They do not want to be in an area that stays moist. Okay.
Okay. Oh, okay. This is kind of back to the critters issue. It's different, kind of along different lines though, and I know you've talked about this in your container classes before. Does the Bob-X, like if you have issues with critters digging in your containers, is that a different solution than the Bob-X, or?
That's completely different. The Bob-X doesn't. It repels to some degree, but it's primarily for the eating. In my containers, I frequently top them off, and I did top these containers with the Vo block, which is also a stone, but it's a permeable stone. But I put a minor amount, just enough to discourage any digging. The squirrels love to dig in fresh soil, and I discourage that in these containers, but not too heavy because I want those creeping sedums to go down into there and take root in the soil. In all of my other containers, when I finish potting them up, I always hold the soil at least an inch below the top so that its watering is easier. If you fill soil all the way to the tippy top of your container, it is difficult to water it, okay? So you don't want to do that. Hold it down at least an inch. And then my preferred stone is the Seminole chips. It's very irregular, so the slugs don't like it as well either. And I do about a ½ an inch around of the plants after they're in and planted. And so there is no fresh soil there for the squirrels to see, and they're not as likely to dig in it. So that's my solution to keeping them from digging. So far, it's worked quite well. Now, you could also, if you didn't want to use the stone, you could try using some of the Virginia Finds mulch. That would be particularly good around the vegetables, but you'd have to put a really good 1/2 inch there. You want to cover all the soil, okay, in that. So
Okay.
that's how I work with that.
Okay, that's good information. Next question is brand question. The scoop that you have shown that Claire used to, is that a Wilcox brand scoop?
Oh, you know, this is not Wilcox. I wish I could read that. I think it says B-A-N-D.
Bond.
Bond, B-O-N-D. Bond. Thank you, Danny. He's so useful. Wow. Bond, but it's really well made. It's the stainless steel that's welded nicely.
All right, good to know. Okay, this last question we have. The question is about deer. Do you use any kind of fencing, like actual fencing, not the liquid fence, for the deer?
Well, I don't think you're allowed to use electric fence.
Oh no, not electric fence, like an actual physical fence as opposed to like the liquid fence product.
Okay. Actual fences are wonderful if you have it. They just have to be quite tall. Okay, and you have to determine what height is allowed in the area. You know, I use for a pretty large garden, 100 feet by 30 feet, which is my vegetable and herb garden and perennial too. I use the heavy duty deer fencing around that, and it has lasted now for several years. And it's very easy and very lightweight and not ugly, really. I do enjoy that. So fencing. Now, for those who don't want to spray, I have seen people, and particularly in a lot of the commercial plantings, I have seen people actually lay the deer fencing somewhat over their bed. You know, I haven't done that. That doesn't particularly appeal to me, but it is doable. Okay. It's not terribly visible from a distance.
Okay. All righty. Well, that's all the questions we have, Peg. So we've got a couple minutes left. If you have anything you would like to wrap up with, we have a couple minutes, or we can go ahead and wrap it up.
No, I'd love to comment on a couple of things. I can't lift it because it's just been watered, and but Danny can. All right, Danny, kind of turn it this way a little bit. We have just gotten in the most beautiful containers, and this one has this wonderful spiky plant in it that's so interesting with the begonias, and this is the coleus with the creeping Jenny coming out of it. This one will take a lot of sunshine, full sun, because these particular begonias are Selenia. It's that type is the only one that'll take the afternoon sun. The other types will all take sun except the hottest afternoon sun. This one will grow good dappled light, good morning light, but also afternoon light. So this is a wonderful, pick it up, it's already ready to go. Now this one, Danny, this I thought was so cute because it's wonderful for a growing centerpiece that you can then take outside, and it happens to be the wonderful little begonia that does not like the hottest afternoon sun. So fortunately we have, I can't tell them apart when they come in. I have to say, okay, be sure the sun ones are on this side and the shade ones on this side because they're so similar. But the Selenias will take part shade, dappled light through the day, and even afternoon sun. A lot of the others will take everything except the hottest afternoon sun, and this one falls into that category. But it's just a wonderful, wonderful little thought or idea, because after all, Mother's Day is on Sunday, and all mothers that I know of enjoy flowers. Okay, there are now, I'm hoping, okay, frost is behind us, And it's time. We're all excited to get all these containers changed out. And walking through that annual section and perennial section with color, because everybody's looking for color right now, and containers are a fantastic way to get that. It's just such fun. There's so many annuals out there right now. When someone comes in and asks for something, I'll say, I think we're just going to have to look for that, because we've had so many trucks coming in that there's no time to organize it the way that we would like to do so. But it's just such an exciting time of the year. And I'm enjoying having my children and grandchildren coming and walking through the garden, because while I certainly cannot keep the garden the way I once did, it's fine. Everybody loves it anyway, So I've enjoyed sharing this with you today, and I hope that there's something you can use, or something that will suggest thoughts and ideas for what maybe you would like to use. And I thank you for watching, and happy Mother's Day to all of those of you out there with children.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peg. And happy Mother's Day to you as well. Definitely, everybody have a great weekend, and keep an eye out for that email coming tomorrow with some lists of the plants that were discussed, and a recording and a coupon. So everybody have a great weekend. And Peg, thank you once again.
Thank you, Sally.
Bye.
Bye-bye.